la preparación de nuestra tercera Connectathon. Veo que tenemos ya un buen número de
I can
participantes.
see that we have a good number of participants already, but maybe we can still wait for a couple of minutes just to be absolutely sure that we have everybody connected. Our presenter is ready. It'll be Albani Olivieri, but we're going to give you just a couple of minutes before the rest of our colleagues get connected. So we'll start very soon.
Para todas.
So again, good morning, everybody, and it's time for us to get started. Albany Olivieri will be presenting today the concept and the configuration of the broadcast node, which is a component that we have been using as part of the data exchange architecture within the project, and it is a component that allows us to channel the request to the national servers. So many of you have already used this broadcast node, sorry, the broadcast node in the connectathon that we had in Sao Paulo, but it is important to keep in mind the concepts behind it, and we're also going to be using it in the connectathon in October. So Albany is part of the technical team. She is helping us with the process, and she's going to tell us the scope, and she's going to explain to us the platform. So, Albany, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for being with us. Well, thank you, Fernando. Let me repeat some of the things that you have already mentioned. My name is Albany Olivieri, and I'm part of the technical team in this project, LACPASS. So I'm here to share with you part of the information on the broadcast node, as Fernando has mentioned. So allow me, please, to share my screen. And please let me know if you can see the presentation. Can you see it? Yes, we can see it well. Okay, thank you for that confirmation and thank you for being here today then. So, as Fernando and I were just saying, we want to provide a workshop on the broadcast nodes. But before actually beginning to technically define what it is, I would like to start by showing you what is the reason behind this component. So, what we have here is a use case. Let's say that a country, we're going to call it country one, just a generic name. Let's say that this country, country one, requires patient information and the patient is a foreigner. It's a foreigner, so we do not know if the patient has lived in one or more countries, or if the patient has traveled, and if they've had any medical problems during these trips, and if he has medical records in other places aside from the country of origin. So if we want to know the clinical information for this patient, we do not know where to search for it because it could be in country two, country three, country four. So to begin with, we do not know. So who can respond to that question? Where can we get the information from? And this is where we have the broadcast node. Basically, what the component does is that it determines who to ask through the communication with all of the file server for the country nodes. So the country 2, country 3, and country 4 get asked the question if they have the information for this patient, and this question is asked by the broadcast nodes. So the flow is Country 1 makes a request through the broadcast node, and this one communicates with all the other countries. So again, let me, as an introduction, then describe the three main transactions for connecting the broadcast node with these file servers. The three transactions that we used are ITI65, which register and persists the IPS in a file server. So if I have a patient and we want to store their information, this transaction allows me to store it through an IPS and to upload it in my own file server, as a country, I mean. ITI 67 looks for the document references, it finds the document references, and the ITI 68 retrieves the IPS document. So basically, this last one, as it says, it retrieves. I mean, we get the direct IPS from that patient that we have been searching for. In today's session, the two transactions that we're going to be focusing on are ITI 67 and 68 because the broadcast node is composed out of these two. So let me just review ITI 65 just to be up to speed regarding the flow. ITI 65, if you may recall, is the country client communicates with the country node, and through ITI 65, it sends an IPS, which is what I was saying in the previous slide. Now let's look at ITI 67, which is searching and finding reference documents. And the flows as to how this transaction is triggered is as follows. First, country node 1 asks for a patient ID. This is done in the broadcast node, and the broadcast node knocks on the doors of each of these servers. Do you have the information or documents for patient with this corresponding ID number? So what the broadcast does is that it asks, and the countries respond whether they have or do not have the information for this patient. So in this particular example, country node 2 and country node 4 have IPS information for this patient. So now, let's say then that country node 1 prefers or wants the information that country node 2 has. So through ITI 68, country node 1 directly asks. And I did forget to mention that the broadcast node, or the response that it gives back, and I will show it to you later on nonetheless, but still, it responds to country node 1. I've asked in countries 2, 3, and 4, and the ones that gave back a response that they do have information are country nodes 2 and 4. So then country node 1 decides if they want to check the IPS from country node 2 or 4. And in this case, it does it country node 2 through ITI 68. So country node 1 directly adds a country node 2 with the ID bundle that the broadcast node gave back, and country node 2 responds back with a JSON. So now that we've generally seen this flow, I would like to show you, more technically speaking, the interactions and these requests. So let us begin with ITI 67, which is finding patient identifier. So what this endpoint does is that it receives a patient identifier and it provides a document reference list for this patient, as all the document references that point to the patient with the identifier that we provided. So this is a command, an example command. Basically, we call the server for the broadcast, which is this one here. The parameter is the patient identifier, and we also add other parameters like the format and the status. This request that we have here should bring back a response like this one, which is basically a resource type bundle, which has its ID, which has some metadata that has a type. And this total that we have here is the total number of countries that responded that yes, they do have information on that patient. The link, this parameter here, is a reference to the list of servers consulted. In other words, the country nodes that the broadcast node asked if to see whether they had information on that patient. And then it gives the part of the answer that we are more interested in, which is the entry. And what this entry brings back is a URL of the document reference that it found in the country that responded or that has documents for that patient. And it's also going to bring back resource. And in this resource, we're going to find the resource type, which is the document reference, another characteristic, which is the ID, metadata, the master identifiers, and the identifier for this document reference. It's also going to bring back the status of the subject, which is basically a reference to the resource that you're asking for, in this case, the patient. So it's going to say the patient that you're asking for has this reference in the specific country node. And the other thing that we're interested in and that we're going to be able to use to trigger the next transaction, ITI 68, is this parameter here, content, because this has another parameter here, which is attachment. And within this one, we have the URL, which is basically where we can ask to obtain the patient's IPS. In this case, in particular, in this reply that we got, which is LACPASS create.cl, the, the, the IPS bundle for the patient that we have consulted is 39. So it gives you back the identifier. So once we get this reply provided by the broadcast, here I'm highlighting that this URL is very important because thanks to that we can trigger ITI 68. So once we have this URL, what we do is that we have a direct request to that server. So the response that we should get is the IPS with the bundle ID, in this case bundle 39, which is the IPS for our patient. Some things that I also wanted to mention here, some features that the broadcast node has. So let's imagine the example where one of the servers from one of the countries is failing, it's down. So the broadcast node still responds, even if it's not active. It's still going to give her an answer. Say the list, I've asked these three nodes, and it'll provide us the answer for node country 2, node country 4. So it'll provide back the information, the list of servers where they did get the information. But it's also going to work then if one server is not up and running. And the other feature that I wanted to mention is that it combines all of the responses from the country nodes, from the Fire servers in one, just as I showed you before in the body of the response in the previous slide. So it has access to each of the servers, and it only provides one answer to the country node with the full summary. So before moving on with these slides, I wanted to ask you if any of you have any questions at this point, but I also wanted to tell you what this looks like in action. So if you, while I open this up, if you have any questions, feel free to do so now. Okay, someone's put their hand up. Miriam, go ahead. Yes, hello. My question is, if a person has been nationalized and they have information in the two countries, how does the server interpret the information?
Sí, a ver, hoy también estamos partiendo de un
We're starting from the assumption that we're using one unique identifier for a patient in each country. It's like using the passport number, let's say. It's as if the patient had the same ID number in the countries in which they went to the doctor. So one single number could be, for example, the passport number. That's what we can say so far. So it does have that precondition, using the same identifier, the same ID in the different nodes. That's one of that's the precondition that the use case requires. That's the answer basically to your question. Now, there is one other thing, which is the use of an empty, which we're going to be trying to use in this new connectathon, which is we're going to look into the possibility of using national identifiers, but in the meantime, we have to use the same ID for the different countries. Thank you, Fernando. Very clear. Okay, if there are no further questions, let me show you how this works then. So here I have a postman to see, to take a look at the request, and then we're going to look at an application which already has these implemented so that you can see what it looks like for the users. So, but first of all, I want to show you the postman. And I've got the broadcast server, which is pointing towards 5001, but this has changed though. But it's still going to work. Port 5001 still works. And it's the URL here that I showed you on the slide. I've added here, and I put as a parameter this patient identifier. And let me change this one, please. So I will be asking about this patient. Hold on just a second because I didn't paste it well. All right. So the parameter here is the passport or the identifier that we have for the patient that we're asking for, and then we send out the request. So don't get scared if it takes some time, because this also has to do with what I was saying, that the broadcast node asks the request to each of the different Fire servers that it's attached to or that have been enrolled, or as the servers that it must go to. Now, there now we've got the response here, but in explaining these, there are some that are down, and the broadcast has a timeout in order to continue asking, even though a server might not have come back. So it takes some time. Not only does it depend on the waiting time for each of the different servers, but also if one is down, we have to wait for the timeout for it to continue asking some of the others. So don't get scared if it takes a little bit of time. But here I've got the reply, the response back. You can see here the same characteristics that I have shown you before. And here it says total one. It says I only found one match in one of the servers that I asked. And these are the servers that were asked. So the LACPASS, there's one here from Paraguay, there's one from Ecuador, and so on and so forth. So it gives you all the different servers that it went to. And if we go down to entry, and as I was saying, This is the answer that the part of the answer that we're more interested in. And if we go down to content, here we can find the attachment and the URL for the server. So it's the URL where we can get the information for the patient that I asked for, and then we go to ITI 68, which is where we're going to directly ask about this IPS. We send out the request, and this is the bundle. The bundle with ID 39 and our patient, and we can check it. We can check that it is the bundle for this patient that we have. Sorry, it's the IPS for the patient that we've asked for. And that's what it looks like in terms of request and response. But here I want to show you an application that we're also developing where it does all of these, but at a higher level. I've shown you this in a deeper dive, and this is a higher level, which is basically the same thing that I have shown you, but now implemented through an application. So we paste here the identifier for the patient that we are asking, and well, it takes however long it takes. Just a little bit of patience. And this is what we would like for each of you to implement. And this is the response that we've gotten. Now I can look in here, look at the IPS, and this is all the information from the IPS deployed with a more friendly format. I've got the name here and the patient's information. And we can check this just like we did before, making sure that it had the patient identifier. There it is. So in the value, this is a JSON viewer, so we should see it here too. So that is that little demo that I wanted to share with you. Now let me go back to the presentation.
Albani, hay una pregunta de José Luis,
Albany, Jose Luis has a question.
si tenemos algo de eso.
The timeout, regarding the timeout, how long the timeout is. Sergio,
Sí,
are you here?
eso es configurable en realidad. Ahora lo tenemos
Yes,
como
actually that can be set
opcional que
up.
tenemos que ponerlo
Right
como
now it's between
default
25 and 30 seconds,
suficiente para que responda
which should be enough for a server to respond, for a Fire
para que
server to
responda
respond. And
si es
regarding the
necesario
other
contestarlas
question,
en paralelo
yes, they
o
are
si
all
solamente
asked
las van a
in
responder
parallel, and then we just wait for the response in order to put together the compilation of the information. Right, and I will talk about that compilation if there are no further questions. Oh yes, and just like we were saying before, it combines all the responses after having asked all the country nodes. But I did want to say some of the other uses of the broadcast node, which is almost a suggestion really, because this type of component can also be used in an internal country network where each node could be a region, could be a state, and from one of them, from one state, one region, he could ask for the patient information in the other regions or the other states within the same country. But it follows the exact same flow. It asks or it goes through the broadcast node, and then it brings back a compilation of where the information was asked and the response that they have gotten. And the objective of this slide is basically to show you that it can also be applied in other contexts. And also, I wanted to tell you that if you want further information or if you want to read more about the transactions, you're kindly invited to go to this link, which is for the Raxel repository for the national backend. And there are also explanations, for example, IPS transactions, and you've got the link also for the reference to the IHE. So that's available, which is important information for you to implement. And also, I've got a link here on the slide, and I will share the links right away. Yes, I will. For the broadcast node repository in the case that you want to check it. I will leave the links in the chat pod, but the presentation will also be available in the Slack if you want to check it at any point in time. And that's what I had to share with you today. I don't know if you have any questions or any doubts. Yes, I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, but we cannot hear you well.
Disculpe, ¿podrías
My apologies, Miguel. Please write the question in the chat pod because we cannot hear the question very well. I know, I understand that it has to do with the IPS identifier. Please, can you write it in the chat pod because we cannot hear you well. My apologies.
Albani, una pregunta o aclaración. Los países
Yes, the
deben
countries
entonces generar,
must,
de acuerdo a los servidores país que están
according to the servers that they have
pagar
been deploying, they must
por
give
cada
us,
uno,
they
o
must
esa
provide
persona
us
es la que tiene
with their
asignada
IP
su
that they
servidor,
have
¿cierto? Eso es lo que
assigned to their servers.
eso es lo que se requiere
That is
para el
required,
funcionamiento
right,
de este broker, básicamente.
for the configuration of the broadcast node. Each country then must provide then the IP. So
Cambia con algunas arquitecturas, digamos que este broadcast
what
node
changes with some of the
tiene
architecture is that this broadcast does not store anything. It doesn't have the information. It only points out to the different servers for the countries. So all the information is still stored in the countries, and the broadcast node only has the URL for each of the different servers. So maybe if you can emphasize that, because it is important that these servers, the test servers, be available, and also how you set it up as part of the architecture. Yes, the idea behind this webinar, as you have seen, it is necessary for us to have the country node IPs so that we can link them to the broadcast, making sure the broadcast can go to them to make the request. The more countries that move forward, the better. It would be great if with your own country nodes, you've already sent your IP, especially in Slack. So if you have your node available, make sure that you attach the address to the Slack so that the rest of the countries can also carry out some tests with the IPSs that have been stored in your countries so that each country has the possibility of running tests with other countries. So the important thing here is having the node well deployed, making sure that an IPS can be linked or can be enrolled so that you can run ITI
Diego
68.
me había pedido que
Diego
compartiera
was
los
asking
archivos
if
del
I could
broadcast en la
go
web, por
back
favor.
to the broadcast
Hago aquí de
request
nuevo.
in the web demo again. And of course, I can do that.
Y aquí Miguel pregunta,
And
respecto a la
Miguel is
seguridad de la
asking
integración,
regarding security for
¿necesitaría
integration.
ponerte
Do you
los
use
esto no tengo la
JWT
información
tokens?
acá, ¿no?
I actually do not have that information at hand.
No sé si Sergio.
I don't know if Sergio does.
Sí, o sea, como decía Albani, el broadcast, la única misión y como
Yes,
propósito que tiene es distribuir las solicitudes que se hacen
we
en
have
los
to
países.
distribute
Pero no
the
maneja
request
información
for each
para
country, so it doesn't manage
usuarios, para
any
servidores,
user information for authentication or anything of the sort.
eso no tiene esa
So
posibilidad.
it doesn't have that
Como hemos
functionality.
implementado políticas de seguridad
The way that we
para
have
poder
implemented these security policies, although they fall
poder
outside of this proof of
mantener
concept, the fire servers for the country nodes should only respond
una
to the
convivencia
broadcast, having it
y tal vez
in the
que se
white
pueda
list
extender
of
y
IPs that it can
eso
respond to.
también
So
requiere
with that, you
infraestructura
can make sure that
de
all the
conexión
requests that get to the
entre
node
los nodos de
only
broadcast.
come from the broadcast and not from anywhere else.
Gracias, Sergio.
Thank you, Sergio.
Y eso. No sé si alguien más tiene otra
And that's all
pregunta.
really. Does anybody else have any additional
Sí, a ver,
questions?
Albany, por favor,
Yes,
ahí donde
Albany,
estás en el
please.
postman al lado derecho,
Right where you are on the postman on the
eh,
right-hand side,
los mayor que slash menor que al lado derecho, abajito
on
de
the
los
right-hand
comentarios,
side to that,
todo el
where
lado
you have
derecho
the
del postman,
comments.
del postman,
Right far-hand side. Down,
no,
go down. There.
era hacia abajo, exacto, sí, quería ver el pool de la
I wanted to
aplicación,
see the CURL.
bueno, no, de momento no veo ningún nivel de seguridad implementado, pero claro
There
está que
seems
podemos
no
hacerlo
security implemented
por
yet,
temas de pruebas y
De
demás.
concepto.
but we understand that this is only
Igualmente
for the
envié
test,
un
for the...
link
Could you copy that
en el
link,
chat
please, in the chat pod,
para no ir haciendo sus testeos. Muchas
so
gracias.
that we can carry out our tests?
Ojo que este que está aquí es con otro parámetro. O sea,
Remember that this is another parameter. You're going to have to change
Sí,
the
porque tiene
identifier.
identifier, sí.
una barrita.
En caso de que no caiga el broadcastear al paciente, sea el
In case of the
indica que
node
cualquier comunicación
broadcaster is down, are there any alerts given?
no,
The answer is no.
no, simplemente, a ver si entendí, es como que yo pregunto por un paciente
So we ask
y sé
about
que ya
a
tengo una persona
patient,
en el
and
país
the patient, I have
de origen,
answers. I
entiendo,
have.
eso
Sorry, I'm
es
sorry. I'm
que se hace
confused.
con respecto al país de origen del mismo. No, simplemente va a entregar como dónde encontró, sin importar si es
It's
en
only going
origen
to
o si
tell
es
you the where it found information, and
información
it's not going to make a reference as
pertinente.
to if it's the country of origin of the
El
patient
broadcast
or
guarda
the
unos
broadcast. Does it
sus utilizadas.
save a historical
Em,
information of the
como por varias
requests?
llamadas o varias requests. Si hace varias requests o llamadas al broadcast no guarda un histórico
No, there is
de
no
cuántas
historical information
solicitudes al
on
paciente
how
le hizo para
many
responder de manera
questions you've
explícita
asked,
en
but it
cada
will
tipo
tell you
de request. Yo puedo
for
hacer
your
request para
request that
hacer
these
request para
were
hacer más bien
the request
descargar
or that were
soporte
asked,
de
or
servidor.
we asked, I asked all of these servers.
Ok, porque podríamos estar obteniendo datos parciales de otro país no actualizados. Debe haber un resource type patient y este referenciado en el bundle para que el broadcast encuentre la
Must there
identifier.
be a resource type
Sí,
patient,
o
and
sea,
this
el
must be
bundle
referenced to the
identifier
bundle for the
es
broadcast to find the
este.
identifier?
Tiene que haber un recurso
Yes,
del mismo
there
paciente
has to be a resource
correspondiente al
type
paciente que estás
patient
buscando.
for the patient that you're asking for. Yes, the answer is a yes.
para complementar eso último, de hecho
And to
necesita
supplement
que haya
that,
existida
it is necessary to have executed a
prácticamente
transaction
la validación
65, which creates all the necessary resources so that all of these searches can be carried out.
Sí. Aquí sale la pregunta, o sea, solo guarda histórico de los requests. Sí, lo que
So it only
cada vez
saves
que
the
pregunte.
historical of the request, but every time that you ask.
El valor total indica la cantidad de servicios donde se
Does the
encuentra el
total
paciente.
value
Para ser
indicate the
exacto,
number of
esta sería la
services?
cantidad de servicios donde se ha encontrado el paciente.
It's the number of services where the patient has been found. For example,
Uno.
in this request,
Esto
the answer, the
significa
response that I got is 1,
1,
but it asked,
5, 6, 7, 8
it,
creo.
it connected to 8 different servers. So it does make a reference as to where the patient information was found.
¿Alguna otra duda?
Are there any other doubts?
Si no, voy a dejar de compartir
Okay, so let me stop sharing
y
my
así yo
screen.
doy fin a mi presentación.
With that, I have finished then my presentation.
Tengo una duda. El momento en
I
que
have a
hace
doubt.
la consulta del paciente,
When it
tiene varios nodos, ¿no es
consults
cierto?
in the
Y hay varios
several
respuestas, ¿no es cierto? El
country
momento que le
nodes,
responde, por ejemplo, de
and
tres
when they get a
países,
response from 3 different
cada uno de esos
countries,
países
and in each of these countries it had a
todo
different
eso responde en una
diagnosis,
sola respuesta,
is that
esa
all
misma
come back
respuesta
in one
tiene,
single response, and
por
there
ejemplo, los tres diagnósticos
I will get
de los
all 3
países?
diagnoses, one from each country?
Sí.
Is that the way it's going to be?
Sí, o sea, más que diagnóstico, los 3
Yes,
IPS.
the 3
Si,
IPS. So
pongamos
let's
un
say
ejemplo, si yo
that
Chile consulto por una
Chile
persona
asks about a patient,
em, y, no sé, supón que Colombia
and let's
y
say that
Panamá
Colombia
tienen
and Panama
información.
have
Entonces, el broadcast me va
information,
a entregar
and the broadcast will give me
los punteros o las
the
referencias hacia la
references
IPS que encontró
for the
en,
IPS
o sea,
that
porque me dice
they
Colombia,
have
pero
found in
porque
Colombia,
estoy
as
haciendo
also the one that it found
IPS.
in
Y es
Panama.
cuestión del país
The
donde ellos quieran,
IPS. Now, it
vaya
is the
llevando esa
country that
información. Pero sería
decides
como
which
una
ones
referencia
they
global.
will continue consulting, but yes, it gives you
Gracias.
all of those reference. Yes, Adriana, and supplementing what Albany has said, the consultation is for a specific document. And what comes back, the reference that comes back, is as many documents as the countries have. So with this, you will see how many references you have found. For example, the example that Albany just gave was information from Colombia and Panama. So according to the date, maybe let's say that the latest one comes from Panama, so that's the one that they want to ask. And it's going to bring back all the Panama IPS. And then he says, no, let's look for the one in Colombia. And then he can bring back the IPS from Colombia. So it doesn't integrate the separate IPS because the, that could also be a dialogue. It gives individual instances, the different IPSs separately. So ITI 68 just deploys an IPS. It brings back one specific IPS document that has previously been saved in the country node.
Súper, muchas gracias, Fernando. Y antes
Thank
de
you,
pasar,
Fernando.
y me
And
recuerdo que la
also
pregunta
here I
anterior
was just reminded of something that's very
para
important,
también comentarlo.
which is worthwhile
El
mentioning.
broadcast server también
The
tiene
broadcast
un
server
endpoint que te
also
permite
has an
ver
endpoint
cuáles son las
that allows
fuentes
you to
de
see
referencia,
which are the
los
trusted
nodos donde
parties,
recibe el
which
banco
is the nodes that
y
it's going to go to.
dentro de la respuesta que
And
envíe
as part of the response,
lo que se va a encontrar es
you
todo
will
el
find
servidor
the server
al
that it's pointing to
si este no, el código del
the
país
country
y
code,
algunos otros datos,
and then some
pero
additional
se
data.
supone
But
que
what I
nuestras
want
líneas
to
rojas
say with
son
this
estos
is that
nodos, que
there
son
you
los
can also see
nodos a los que el
which
broadcast
are the
está
nodes
consultando.
that the
Y
broadcast is
también
going to, that the
como
broadcast is
el
consulting, that
país
the broadcast is
donde se está
requesting the
mandando
information
la
from,
información hacia el
and
lugar
also
y el
the
destino.
country that each of
Exacto,
these URLs
que voy a mencionar.
belong
Eso es
to.
lo que es el endpoint.
This is the endpoint.
Albani, ¿es un comentario?
Sí,
Albany,
señor.
a question, please.
Con esa información también
So with
podemos
that
saber
information,
en el
you
listado,
you in your list,
cuando le devuelvan
for example, when
eso
you
al
get
cliente
back an IPS from Uruguay, let's
incluye
say
el bundle
the
más
URL of the bundle
la
is going to
dirección
be the server
dirección.
slash
Entonces,
bundle
eso es
slash
lo que está
identifier.
vinculado.
So if it shows you a
El
list of all of
país,
the IPSs, you can determine what country it belongs
eso,
to. So it could be
el identificador del IPS,
Uruguay
eso
and the
también lo
IPS identifier,
podemos
similar to
saber
what you showed in that screen.
Ah,
No, estaba bien en esa, pero en el
Yes,
principal
there,
también.
like
Ahí
there,
sería la
there,
forma de
exactly.
identificar este país
That's another way of
con esta
identifying what
especificación de
country
información
it
de la
corresponds
web
to.
que le
The
devuelve
information from the
el
URL that it brings
bundle
back,
con la
the
información
bundle,
que
and
le
the
devuelve.
information.
claro, sí.
Eso
Por-
That is right.
Estoy esperando que muestre el
Yeah, sure.
el
Well,
postman.
I'm just waiting for this to reply, to respond, to show you
también sirve
what
para
you're
saber
saying.
cuál es la
And
URL
it's also
que se
helpful
usa
to see the URL that
porque
each country has set up because they've been asking if it has changed or
Sí, claro. Porque
esa nomenclatura es estándar en realidad, o sea,
there. That
las letras son las
the
mismas.
letters, the nomenclature
claro,
is
eso.
done.
Entonces, de ese endpoint también se pueden valer para
Yes,
ver
from this
dónde está
endpoint,
localizado
as
el
Lucia
servidor.
was saying, you can also come across the answer.
Y nos podría compartir el Postman Collection, sí, no hay ningún problema.
Can you share the Postman collection? Sure,
Acá lo
no
estoy
problem.
checando.
Let me put it here in the chat pod.
Bueno, voy a dejar de compartir nuevamente.
Igual también lo podemos subir luego al Slack, ¿no?
Sí, sí, lo
We
puedo
can
subir al
also
Slack.
upload it in the Slack, right? Yes, I will do that.
Ujú. Verificando que este sea el link.
I'm just checking that I'm sending the right link.
Ahí dejé el link en el chat y también lo estoy agregando al Slack.
There's the link in the chat, and I'm also putting it in the Slack.
En general. Eso por mi parte.
So that's all on my
Muchísimas gracias,
side.
chicas. Muchísimas
So if there are no further questions, then thank you so much for attending.
Bueno, no, pues Albany, de verdad que
That
muchas
was
gracias.
very good, Albany. Thank you so much.
Ya tenemos bastante material aquí para
So we have a lot of material here for us to check and to start configuring and setting up the applications
ajustando.
that the countries have been working on. We have the URLs to ask questions, and we can start with the tests. We already have the broadcast server ready to start searching some of the use cases
A implementar.
that we have started implementing. So
Quedamos atentos a inquietudes, dudas,
we are open to any questions that you may have, and we're going to have more webinars on this and other topics. So, Albany, thank you very much, and I want to thank you all for your participation.
Muchas gracias a todos. Gracias.
bueno, hasta pronto y ya nos vemos.
See you soon.